As ever, health and safety should be taken seriously when using power tools for cutting worktops. Furthermore, you should familiarise yourself with the correct handling procedures. All such issues and more are dealt with in the installation leaflet enclosed with the installation kit. When you receive the goods, they will be packaged in shrink wrap and foam edging for protection. When removing any packaging, any cutting should be done from the underside, so that the surface of the material does not get damaged. Having removed the packaging, and prior to fitting the worktops, you should carefully inspect for any damage. In the unlikely event of there being any such damage, you should report it immediately to your supplier. Before starting the installation, you should firstly ensure that all of the base units have been secured in their final position, and that all end panels are fixed. Furthermore, all walls must be battened out where there are corner bases, or units that exceed 600 mm in width. This will ensure sufficient rigidity and support for the worktops. And finally, ensure that all units are level before proceeding to the next stage. Having done all the necessary checking, and before anything is cut, there are a number of other things that need to be considered, such as making sure that any sink or hob you may have is located correctly. Where is the most appropriate place for joints to be located? Further details of such considerations can be found in the installation leaflet. Cutting to size is achieved by either using an electric circular saw or by trimming with a handheld router, running against a straight edge. It is important when using a router that the material is cut through in stages so that a clean edge is achieved. Once the length of the required worktop has been created, we can now check that the required overhang is being achieved. For this, we establish the amount of excess overhang we currently have, and mark the back surface with the use of a scribing block, cut to the size of the excess that needs to be removed. The outside of the line of the required scribe is then sawn off with the use of the electric saw. The electric saw is also used if the worktop needs cutting to length. Any excess material can then be simply planed off with the use of a power planer. Any top-mounted sink or hob cutout can be profiled out with the use of a pre-prepared template, cut to the required size with the use of a router and profiled off accordingly. Always cut the depth in stages. Do not attempt to force the router to cut away all the material at once. Having completed the cutout, we can then apply the desired edge detail to the cutout, again using the handheld router with the appropriate cutter. If the cutout is to be used for a hob, then it is essential to apply the reflective tape enclosed in the installation kit. This will prevent any excess heat from generating into the surface. Please note that where worktops are installed above washers or dishwashers, that the foil contained in the installation kit should be adhered to the underside of the worktop. This will protect the worktop from intense heat or moisture. There are 2 or 3 methods that can be used for cramping the joints together. One method is to apply timber blocks hot melted down to either side of the joint. These blocks will then be used as a brace to tighten the joint once the adhesive is applied. Before gluing the joint, the pieces to be glued should be pushed together dry. To ensure that when they are cramped together there are no gaps and that the joint is level. If there are gaps, then the pieces should be redressed until the joint is inconspicuous when pulled together. Prior to bonding the joint together, it is essential to ensure that the areas to be glued are clean. These are cleaned with the use of the alcohol wipe contained in the installation kit. With the use of the adhesive and adapter enclosed in the installation kit, as well as the standard silicone gun, the 2 beads of adhesive are applied to the face of the joint, one at the top edge and one at the bottom edge. The pieces are then pushed together, ensuring that there is sufficient adhesive to squeeze out of the joint. The joint is then finally cramped up, ensuring that the joint is level. The more level the joint is now, the less sanding there is to do later. Apollo Slab Tech worktop should be fixed with silicone at the intersection with the top and the carcass. Alternatively, worktops may be spot silicone to the surface of the carcass. If necessary, worktops may be screwed into position using the L-shaped brackets in the installation kit. Brackets should be positioned so that the elongated holes run along the underside of the worktop, ensuring that lateral movement is possible. Always drill a pilot hole one size smaller than the screw being used and ensure the screw penetrates no more than halfway into the worktop. Fully tighten all screws, but then finally slacken the screw in the worktop by half a turn. This will ensure that the worktop has a small degree of lateral movement. Once the adhesive has hardened to a hard rubber consistency, the clamps can be removed. The blocks tapped off. Any hot melt and jointing adhesive can be removed by paring off with a chisel. In order to bring the finish of the jointed area to match the rest of the surface, we go through the sanding procedure, starting with 100 grit, then 150 grit, and finally 220 paper. It is essential that prior to changing to a finer grit that the scratches from the previous paper have been removed. Be careful, however, not to oversand, as this can leave dips in the surface. The final finish is achieved with the red and then the grey buffing pads, followed by the white buffing pad and cream clean. Finally spray the worktop with stone guard and buff to a finish with the microfiber cloth. Firstly, we line up the position of the sink on the underside of the worktop and mark around the outside of the flange of the sink. The sink brackets are then placed in the 4 corners of the sink. and we drill a pilot hole in each of the bracket into which we will screw the bracket in place. The pilot hole should be one size smaller than the screw being used. We then apply a silicone bead to the flange of the bowl, which is carefully positioned before securing the brackets. Tap holes are simply drilled with the use of a hole saw, or they can be routed with a straight flue cutter using a handheld router. If required, it is possible to shape the edge of the worktop by simply routing the required radius or shape using a template such as the Apollo template pictured here to profile off. As always, it is important to profile off in stages. Do not attempt to force the router to cut away the material in one pass. Once the curve has been completed, finish in the usual manner with the 100, 150 and 220 grit sandpapers, followed by the red and grey buffing pads, and finally the white buffing pad and cream clean solution. Upstands are firstly cut to length and then fixed in position by applying silicone to the bottom edge of the upstand, and then to the back of the upstand. Hot melt is then applied to the back of the upstand to hold it in position while the silicone cures. If there are any joins in the upstand, then the joining procedure is followed, using the adhesive supplied with the installation kit. Once the worktops are installed, edges can be profiled to form whatever profile is required. This is achieved using an appropriate cutter. In this instance, we are routing a small bevel to the top edge of the surface. Using one of the router bits from the specially selected Apollo router bit set. These are available from Apollo at only £49 for the box set. Once the edge detail has been applied, the edge is then sanded using the 100, 150 and 220 grit sandpapers, followed by the red and grey buffing pads, and finally the white buffing pad and cream clean solution. Finish off with stone clean spray and the microfiber cloth. Everyday spillages such as tea and coffee can be wiped away with a clean damp cloth. Any mark more permanent can be sanded away following the usual procedure. Starting with 100 grit, then 150 grit, and finally 220 grit sandpaper. It is essential that prior to changing to a finer grit that the scratches from the previous paper are removed. Be careful, however, not to oversand, as this can leave dips in the surface. The final finish is achieved with the red and then grey buffing pads. And finally, pour a generous amount of cream clean solution onto the worktop and buff the whole of the worktop with the white buffing pad until an even finish is achieved. Then spray the worktop with Stone Guard and buff dry with the microfiber cloth.